Hello everyone, this is Professor Reha here with the class combination tier list. Now Diablo Fallout, thank you for your suggestion, it was awesome, and thank you for your support. Suggested this from the perspective of a new player, asking me what I considered would be good builds for newer players. Now the problem with builds specifically is that in almost all cases they require specific items or at the very least specific monster and frequency to work properly. So I'm not going to recommend builds in this mini-series. I'm going to recommend combinations. Class combinations that you can use and be effective with regardless of what equipment you have. Ideally, you find some equipment that helps this combination along the way, and from there you can decide how you want to play it. But you don't need any equipment for these combinations to excel in the particular way that they're built for. And I use the term built there loosely. Now, this is going to be S tier, or the 4 class combinations that I really feel excel in some specific area. These are a little bit specialized in broad concepts. They have a little bit of variety in them. One of them has a lot of variety, so you can customize them how you want, but also keep in mind these are, for the most part, potential. For example, the damage output potential of a class. That only represents the potential maximum damage output you could do. If it's high damage, if it's medium damage, if it's low damage. I use a 1 through 3 scale. Well, 0 through 3, but you know what I mean. So if you want to chart this out to a 1 through 5, that's fine with me, but I use a 0 through 3. But you'll have a general idea of its potential damage output through my ratings. Same thing with survivability, which isn't just resistance and defense increases, but also your types of healing and how much it heals you and how effective it overall is. How many different ways you can keep yourself alive, be it defense or healing or life drain. The third category is what I call cooperation. I've referred to this also as contrast in my walkthrough, but coordination I think is a little easier of a parameter to grasp in combination with the other ones. But coordination is simply how well the two classes work well together, how many different skills of one class benefit or otherwise boost the skills of another class, how much they mingle together and really just overall be very effective. The fourth category is variability, or versatility, depending on what you want to call it. This is simply how many different ways, how many different playstyles you can play the class and remain very effective. That doesn't mean you can't play any particular combination some specific way. Whether or not that requires items is irrelevant for this particular series, but just how many ways, ignoring items, you can effectively play the combination. With that being said, let's hop right into it. First off, the most damaging combination of classes, which is Occultist, Nightblade. Now some people will say, well, Occultist or Nightblade and Necromancer, but there's a small problem with that. First off, although Necromancer does have the extremely nice Foul Eruption, which hits very hard with that 28% reduction to enemies' health, the ultimate problem with Necromancer in conjunction with Nightblade and Occultist is that it doesn't boost your damage types particularly high. You do have on the Necromancer Harbinger of Souls, obviously, increasing vitality and Aether. Neither Nightblade nor Occultist do. And you can decrease the resistances to the same. And that's basically it for Necromancer. It doesn't do anything else that enhances its damage types. So that really inhibits its ability to hit that extremely high level of damage that Nightblade and Occultist can hit. Also, Nightblade gets the extremely useful Execution, which is really good against single targets. Combine this with Bloody Pox, which is extremely effective against large mobs, and you have a percentage of health reduction for both strong single targets and for en masse groups. What gives Occultist the slight edge over Necromancer is the ability to utilize Slail's Witchfire to increase the frequency of execution triggering. More attack speed means more executions. Additionally, you can grab Possession to increase vitality and poison and acid if you want to go into those damage types, which boosts pretty much everything that the Nightblade does. And pretty much everything that the Occultist does. And additionally, you can also go into Aspect of the Guardian and increase your poison, acid, vitality, and vitality decay damage even further. Or even go into a really sweet retaliation build if you really feel like to. So there's all kinds of different ways you can enhance your own damage output, and 2 different percentage of health damage types. One for groups, one for single targets. How you actually want to deal your damage is entirely up to you, but there is a lot of overlap, especially when you consider all of the various skills, passive skills, that the Nightblade has to increase these, such as more poison, acid damage, and retaliation damage out of Merciless Repertoire. You have the Vitality and Bleeding of Anatomy of Murder, which is my favorite and the one that I would recommend if you're building this combination and you have no items, you have no clue what you're doing. Anatomy of Murder is a solid passive skill regardless of where you're going. If you're going with Execution plus Bloody Pox, they both do Vitality, both do, well, this does Vitality and Bleeding, this does Bleeding, this doesn't do Vitality as far as I know. No, it does not. But it still does Bleeding, and you can still incorporate some Bleeding from elsewhere. So it is a fantastic skill that you can pick up. You can increase your poison acid through lethal assault as well. There's a lot of poison acid, yes, but you have all kinds of different damage types, and you have all different ways to increase them. Furthermore, all of these different damage types means that no matter what enemy you come up against, they're not going to be able to resist all of your damage, or at least they're not likely to. There are a couple of special individuals that probably might, but beyond them, and these are mostly secret bosses, which you don't have to worry about immediately. But for all of the situations, no one enemy is going to resist all of the different damage types you can bring to the table. And you can bring all of those damage types to the table very effectively. What you ultimately wind up going with will depend upon the items you pick up along the way. But you can pick pretty much any set of skills from Nightblade and most anything from Occultist and put out extremely large quantities of damage. This is why this is a 3 out of 3 on damage potential or offense. By the way, all of these ratings will be in the description below. Back to the point. Defensively, it is only going to be a 2.5. Now that's still pretty high for a pure offense class, but you have a lot of little tiny ways you can increase your survivability. First off, you have the damage reduction or damage absorption of possession. You have a self-heal and Sigil of Consumption, as well as at the end of Shadow Strike, you have Pneumatic Burst to heal you, you have Blood of Dread that can heal you, you have the Heal from the Crow, you have all these different ways of healing, you have complete immunity and more retaliation damage on Blade Barrier, you have the Veil of Shadows reduction to offensive ability and enemies' speed, which includes, by the way, their attack speed. You have Phantasmal Armor for some mild entrapment reduction and pierce resistance and straight up armor. You have a lot of different ways in which you can prevent enemies from damaging you that hard. Not any particular specialization, you just have a little bit of everything going on here. But you have enough where you shouldn't have that much of a hard time surviving if you need to. So your defensive ability, your defensive potential for this combination is a 2.5. For coordination, it's also going to be 2.5. As I mentioned with the offense, a lot of these skills transfer over and benefit each other, and you have a lot of different ways you can enhance abilities from one with abilities of the other. Again, except for the Hellhound and Bonds of Bismiel, really, you can't really go wrong. Even the Crow can help you by, first off, providing healing, second off, providing some elemental damage increases, which if you're going into destruction and you've got some cold damage here like Amarasta's Blade Burst, or you're going into the dual blades, now you're talking about a decent bit of elemental damage that you can enhance. Is this the best way? Well, probably not unless you have the right items for it, and even then I would still look at it funny. But you could do it if you really wanted to. The Crow can enhance your damage output for Nightblade decently. On top of this, finally, we're going to go with Versatility, and this is a flat 2. And the main reason why is because you can't really do an effective pet build here. You can go a little hybrid, you can splash into pets a little bit with the Summon Familiar. but there's no real benefit to the Hellhound for this combination, and there's no reason to go into Bonds Abysmal, since the Nightblade does not do anything with pets. It does not interact with pets in any capacity. So from that perspective, it is a 2.0 on versatility. You can't go into pets. You're pretty much looking also to not necessarily tank. You can kind of tank with the retaliation build. You have decent healing that you can provide. You have some armor increases, but you can't go like full tank with this combination. It's exceedingly difficult to go full tank because you are sort of leaning towards some mild defense mitigation and a lot of self-heal, either through damaging the enemy or through just a straight heal from an ability. How you work that is entirely up to you, but running full tank is also quite difficult with this combination. So, to summarize on this combination, offense 3.0, defense 2.5, coordination 2.5, variability or versatility 2.0. Now, that is the most offensive class available. What is the actual most defensive combination? That's the one I'm using in my walkthrough, the Soldier Arcanist. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, Soldier Necromancer is tankier. Not really. Again, Necromancer is looking to drain life out of enemies. The only straight actual defensive boosts it has is Mark of Torment, which only lasts 5 seconds at max level. Ill Omen, which confuses and fears enemies. It doesn't even fear enemies. It just reduces their damage and confuses them. And you've got the HP increase and the eventual attack speed reduction of Spectral Wrath and Spectral Binding. You have a Confuse here, and you have reduced damage here. And you have reduced offensive ability here. I thought slower movement, not slower attack speed. So you do have some methods of keeping yourself alive. You have reduced offensive ability with Blood Boil, but there's no defense increase. It's HP, it's reducing the enemy's ability to do damage to you, and even then they're not really spectacular compared to the various options the Arcanist has at preventing damage. First off, you have Maven Sphere of Protection, and while I'm on the subject, if you also have Menhir's Bulwark, that's 15% damage absorption, plus 20% damage absorption means yes, you are absorbing, or in other words, completely nullifying, over a third of the damage coming your way. Think about that for a minute. Besides this, you have Electrous Flash Freeze, which works super well with this combination regardless of how you build. So you have the freeze that you have with that. If you're feeling particularly worried, you can grab Kalidor's Tempest, Wrath of Agravix, knock them down. You additionally have a freeze available on Frozen Core. You have a similar, if not slightly better version of the Mark of Torment, I believe it's called. Yeah, Mark of Torment. On the Mirror of Arioctes, which gives you full immunity for 3 seconds rather than half immunity for 5. So you just have all of these fantastic options. You have pretty much full 30% entrapment reduction on conversion if you're playing alone and you really need it. You have a lot here that you can use to prevent incoming damage just with the Arcanist alone. I haven't even gotten into Menhir's Will, which is a fantastic automatic self-heal for completely free on the soldier. We've got, of course, the various shield skills. Look at all this health that this restores. This restores almost 2/3 of your health by itself, no items. Then you have extra health you can get with military conditioning. You have the shield training for its shield block chance and recovery time. Of course, Menhir's Bulwark, which we already covered. You have a knockdown on Blitz and reduced defensive ability, which doesn't really matter for surviving. You have a stun on Force Wave. You have... I thought there was something on this? No. You have the increased defensive ability and armor on Field Command. You have Overguard. You've got elemental resistance here, along with more damage. You have increased health regeneration here. You have increased... Well, you have better resistances here. You have increased armor absorption. You can have Terrify on Warcry. You get the picture. There's a lot going on here that either keeps enemies off of you or drastically reduces the amount of damage they're hitting you with. Even though it doesn't have a whole lot of conventional healing, the only conventional heal it's got is the Menhir's Will, there's so many other options to either prevent enemies from attacking you in the first place, or otherwise mitigating their incoming damage via shield or passive, that you have so many different ways of surviving. This is why the defense rating on this combination is 3.0, and you will never see this high of a rating on another combination. Some cut it close, but nobody can really beat that 35% damage absorption. That's impossible to beat. You really cannot get any better than that. Because as I've always been saying this whole time through the walkthrough, and you will hear me say this a lot, prevention is better than healing. In other words, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's just as true in Grim Dawn as it is in real life. This is the ultimate last word in survivability. Offensively, it is only a 2.0 though. First off, only the soldier has a percentage health reduction in Warcry. Another problem with the combination offensively is that you're only really building into one of two different damage types. Physical with a little bit of elemental, or elemental with a little bit of aether, essentially is what you're running with. And the reason why is because that's basically the entirety of what the damage types of these two are. Arcanist only does elemental and aether damage, straight up. Soldier does physical, internal trauma, can do a little pierce, can do a little bleeding, but not enough where you would want to necessarily focus on that as a damage type, especially since neither class enhances bleeding or piercing specifically. You're either increasing your physical and internal trauma, your elemental, and or your aether. And even then, for Arcanist, a lot of that is elemental. If you've been following my walkthrough, I've been focusing most of on elemental. And quite frankly, Electra's Flash Freeze is a fantastic pickup regardless of which way you go. If you're going with the physical damage, Absolute Zero gives that negative 40% physical resistance. Fantastic. You're going with that elemental build, Electra's Flash Freeze minus 100% fire resistance. Boom. No matter how you build, Electra's Flash Freeze plus Absolute Zero is pure profit. But yeah, offensively it is only a 2.0 because of these reasons. You're basically limited to two different damage types, physical and elemental, or elemental and aether. And that's not great offensive options, since physical resistance amongst enemies is extremely common in the late game, and elemental resistance is also decently common. Whether it's full elemental resistance or only partial elemental resistance, it's fairly commonplace. So you do have some offensive abilities, not so much in the early game, but in the late game it does get a little bit hard to kill things quickly. It becomes basically a slugfest, and you're relying upon your durability to get you through fights, which is okay. Bit slow, but okay. Also, for the same reason the versatility of this combination does suffer, we are talking about a 1 on the versatility, because you can build full tank, you can make a sweet retaliation build, and you can do pure aggression. But if you're doing pure aggression, like I said, you're doing elemental and physical, or elemental and aether. There's just these two different damage types you're doing. So the versatility of this class does suffer somewhat, especially since additionally on top of that the coordination is only a 2.0, because there's some skills you must either have a shield or an offhand with. And since you can't equip both of those, you do have to make a decision, and if you decide to switch midway through, that might require a pretty substantial rework of your class, because if you have an offhand, say offhand is a bad starting example. Let's say you're a soldier Arcanist. You start with a shield, you have Force Wave, you have all 16 points in Force Wave, and you've got 10 points in shield training, and you've got cadence for kicks. Okay, you've got these, and then you pick up this really sweet offhand that you really want to use. Well, now you have to wipe your Force Wave, and you have to wipe your shield training in order to go into the offhand. Now, while this isn't too much of a problem initially, when we're talking about skills being able to work with skills of the other class, this does somewhat limit the combination a little bit because you are basically forced to make a choice, shields or offhands. And again, this goes back to the low versatility score. This flows right into that. You do have some hiccups. While Force Wave can work really well with Arcanist abilities, you are limiting yourself to anything that does not require an offhand, which is two of the most powerful skills in the Arcanist. So if you're going for, say, a Reckless Power build, that's really going to hurt that, as an example. So, is it possible? Yes, absolutely. But is it 100% coordinated? No, it's not. So to recap this particular combination, offense 2.0, defense 3.0, coordination 2.0, versatility 1.0. Now, what is the ultimate in coordination? What class combination works so well that no matter how you build it, it will do amazing things? That combination is Demolitionist and Oathkeeper. Now, the Oathkeeper does, excluding Path of the Three and the crystal modifications, it does fire, lightning, internal trauma, and bleeding. Demolitionist's damage types, primary damage types, is fire, lightning, internal trauma, and chaos. You'll notice that only the last one has really changed. Both do physical damage. Pretty much everything does physical damage except for Arcanist. Pretty much. Inquisitor doesn't really either. But everything else does some form of physical damage. And so they share, throw in the physical damage. Anyways, they share 4 damage types. Fire, lightning, internal trauma, and physical. And pierce even. They both do pierce really well as well. If you're equipped with a gun or a sword, you're doing pierce damage. So they share all these different damage types, only the last one isn't shared. Bleeding for Oathkeeper and Chaos for Demolitionist. Everything else, yeah, that's shared. So regardless of how you build, you can boost everything. If you go into just Flame Touched alone, there's nothing you can't build on Oathkeeper that wouldn't benefit from that. Period. If you decide to build Ascension for a retaliation build, absolutely. Absolutely. We get Granado in there. We get that spicy Granado. We go all the way to here. Retaliation damage. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. You know what? We can also do Blast Shield. Get even more retaliation damage in there. Go all the way up to Temper. Yeah. Oh wait, what's that? More retaliation damage on Vindictive Flame? You get the idea. I don't need to go all the way to this. But, yes. We are talking very much about... there's no wrong way to build this combination. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, Professor, you could build Path of the Three and completely goof it. No, actually. Because Path of the Three converts all physical and... converts a percentage of all physical and fire damage into acid damage. That's not restricted to the Oathkeeper skills. That includes Demolitionist skills. So, yes, you can build Path of the Three, go into Dreeg's Reproach for kicks, and Aegis of Thorns, as well as, finally, if you really want to, Scion of Dreeg, and have a very interesting time running a poisonous Demolitionist Oathkeeper build. Is it the best way to play this? No. It is not. Not without specific items, again. But, ignoring that potential output, which even then, even without items, isn't that bad, you can see where the huge amount of damage overlap is absolutely insane. Now, as to the actual rest of the ratings beyond coordination, its damage output is only a 2.0. You might be slightly shocked, but the reason why is, just as we've been talking about, you're really limited in your damage output here. You're doing physical, fire, lightning, and internal trauma, which is just physical damage spread out over time. That is essentially what internal trauma does. Anything that increases your physical resistance will increase internal trauma defense as well. So a 10% physical resistance, for example, will also mitigate internal trauma damage by 10%. They share that same kind of calculation. They share the same resistance there. All damage types have a damage over time version, except for bleeding doesn't have a flat version, and pierce doesn't have a damage over time version, unless you're one of those people that considers bleeding to be the damage over time version of pierce. I'm not fond of the idea because they do have separate resistances, but beyond those two, all damage types have a straight immediate damage and a damage over time. So that's what internal trauma is. Internal trauma is physical damages, DOT, damage over time. That's it. So really, you're only doing 3 different damage types: fire, lightning, and physical. That's not a lot. And you'll agree with me on that one. That's not a whole lot of damage. You could go into the poison acid path of the 3, sure. That would help a little bit, but then you're spreading your damage out. Instead of doing all of this fire and lightning damage, you're now spreading it out a little bit and doing less fire and lightning damage in order to do some poison acid damage. Whether or not that's worth it is entirely up to you. But you can see where that still doesn't necessarily help your offense. It only gives you one more option at the expense of the others. There are ways of reducing your enemy's fire resistance and lightning resistance. Just using Demolitionist alone, we have the Agonizing Flames, we have Thermite Mine, we have options, but it's not necessarily ideal since they don't reduce resistances by so much that you'll be able to fight absolutely everything. Even Thermite Mine only brings it down to like 20, 30, I was going to say 25, but 30 was clearly it. So you do have some potential issues with fire or lightning resistant enemies, and often if an enemy is resistant to fire, they're probably resistant to lightning too, like I said earlier. Furthermore, neither of these classes has a percentage of health damage output, which does hurt the late game a little bit. These are always really strong skills to use in the late game or multiplayer. However, despite that, this is an excellent class combination to utilize in multiplayer because you do get do all kinds of things for your friends. For example, you could grab Blackwater Cocktail and reduce victims' offensive ability, go into high potency for a larger area, slow their attack, reduce their damage, and reduce their resistances. All resistances. That is not just fire resistance. This reduces all of their resistances across the board, and it does it by a decent amount. It is a nice flat 25 rather than a percentage, which is fairly interesting. But you could do that to help your friends. You could go into Hellfire Mine. If your friends are doing Aether damage, you automatically will benefit from the Chaos damage if you build correctly. But you have... Not only can you help your friends pretty well with this combination, but they can cover for your hyper-specialization in Fire and Lightning. Oh, this enemy is resistant to fire? My friends will take care of it. It's fine. So, I would recommend this. If you are going to play this for the first time, you've never played this combination before, you don't have any equipment for this, if you have friends that play Grim Dawn, play this with them, and advise them that there will be certain enemies, certain heroes, and certain bosses that you will basically do nothing to, unless you're lucky and get the equipment you need. You go into specific constellations, etc. It is best to go with friends with this combination. Furthermore, on top of this, if you are a new player and you're really worried about your inexperience causing you to mess up your build by getting the wrong combination of skills, and you don't have the iron bits you need to respec, or you're afraid you won't have the iron bits you need to respec, or you're having a really hard time figuring out what equipment you want to equip, this combination is fantastic, because all a piece of equipment has to do to increase your damage is boost fire damage, boost lightning damage, or boost physical damage. You can write them down, you can remember them very easily however you want. 3 damage types. Very easy to remember. And then you just gotta keep an eye on your resistances, because your damage output will take care of itself. Fire, lightning, physical. What's not to love? So if you're really nervous about that for your first build, you're really afraid you'll mess it up, you can't mess this up. There's nothing you can do. Even if you went into the poison and acid of these, it still can work. You could, and by the time you realize, oh well, maybe I want to really hyper specialize into the fire and lightning, you should have enough bits to By the time you get to Path of the 3, you should have enough iron bits to take this off. Just don't put points into these if you're really afraid. That's basically it. If you're really afraid of messing it up, don't get Dreeg's Reproach, don't get Aegis of Thorns, don't get Scion of Dreeg. Path of the 3 could still work if you really wanted to. But even then, it's just easy enough to avoid. You can just go right into Divine Mandate, blast people with some physical fire damage, have a blast. It is impossible to mess this combination up. So if you're worried about that, this is the combination for you. Grab a friend, at least one, ideally, or play solo. Pray you're lucky. Get that equipment. Get those constellations. Now, haven't talked about the defensive ability of this, and this is a 2.5, because just like the Occultist Nightblade, it has a little bit of everything. We've got some resistance increases here with Blast Shield, we've got some increased health regeneration here, we've got all kinds of stuns. We have four stuns on the Demolitionist alone. This does not include the knockdown here. This does not include the stuns slapped onto this, which can, by the way, stun multiple people, for reference. Actually, in fact, it stuns, what, 5? It can stun up to... I've seen it hit 5, so it can stun up to 5, depending on your equipment. And you've got a stun here that can be automatic. You've got the Presence of Virtue, which increases your healing, your health, your shield block. You've got Ascension, which gives you some damage absorption. It's flat damage absorption. You have some entrapment resistance here. You have some very rare resistances of reflected damage and life reduction, so that's fantastic. You can go into Consecration if you're really worried or having a really hard time surviving. That's fine. You have so many different ways of keeping yourself alive pretty effectively. Again, though, the damage absorption isn't there. There's not a whole lot of damage absorption. There's some flat on this, which is nice, but it's not the percentage that, say, the Occultist has on Possession or that Maven's Sphere of Protection offers. So you do have a little bit of a problem with actually preventing damage. You're mostly relying on your shield, and if you decide not to build a shield, surviving is going to be a bit more difficult, just a bit. But you do have all these options. You have even more, by the way, increased healing off resilience. I forgot to mention that for a second. But you have a bunch of different little ways that you can increase your survivability. So it is a 2.5 out of defense because you can find some way of boosting your survivability regardless of what you're equipped with. And it works. They'll all work. We've already covered why coordination is 3.0. As for versatility, no one will be surprised when I reveal that this is rated as a 1 in versatility. First off, again, you're only doing physical, fire, and lightning damage for the most part. So you're limited in your damage types. If you're looking to be tanky, you're limited to a shield because while you can boost your survivability with non-shield setups, it is much harder. About half of the survivability out of Oathkeeper does assume you're going to be using a shield. You can make a great retaliation build, an aggressive retaliation build with this. This is the second time you've seen a potentially aggressive retaliation build. Nightblade Occultist also could play retaliation aggressively. Soldier has some good retaliation, but I wouldn't necessarily describe it as aggressive retaliation. What I mean by aggressive retaliation is the ability to turn that retaliation into straight off actual hit you with it damage. In this particular example, we're talking about Reprisal adding retaliation damage to your attack. We're talking about Retribution adding the retaliation damage to your attack. Things like that. For Occultist, if you're wondering, I'm talking about the aspect of the Guardian boosting your damage types across the board while you're retaliating, which hits pretty hard. So, yeah, for versatility, there's not a whole lot of versatility with this combination, which is part of the reason why it is so nice for new players just trying to figure things out. That's part of the reason why this class is really nice. That's part of the reason why it can't be messed up, is because there's very few realistic options without needing specific pieces of equipment. With that being said, what is the last S-tier combination? What is the most versatile combination that I have encountered? Occultist, Shaman. Some experienced players will be confused, but hear me out. No matter how you build this combination, you can have a blast, and you can do some really wild things. First off, let's take it from a very interesting perspective. The controversial hot take. You can do a full pet build with this. Easy. Primal Bond. Summon Briarthorn all the way. Mog Drogon's Pact. Then we can go into Summon Familiar all the way. Bonds of Bismeal. Hellhound. Absolutely. Spicy. Primal Bond. Oh wait. It has pretty decent boosts to you. 15% damage absorption. Physical internal trauma and bleeding out the wazoo. Bonuses to pets. Oh, I forgot about the Primal Spirit. But yeah, pretty decent boosts to you. This is one of the very few combinations where you can sit down and build a hybrid pet and personal build and make it work. I know a lot of experienced players don't like building half pet, half personal, or any variation of that. A lot of people swear that you can only build pets if you only focus on pets, and you can only work on yourself if you ignore pets completely. There is a opinion that you must all pet or you must all personal. But Shaman with Occultist or Necromancer really does allow you to do a hybrid of the combination. These are the only two classes that permit this, by the way. The reason why I prefer Occultist Shaman over Necromancer Shaman, and the reason why this is more versatile, is because the benefits of Primal Bond increases Bloody Pox, and Bloody Pox is easily one of the best spells that the Occultist has. So, besides that, you can build a very easy to see Vitality build. You've got Wendigo Totem, which does Vitality damage. It heals you a lot. You've got all of this attack conversion. You can build a Retaliation build with Entangling Vines and Your Terrifying Gaze. You can do a Bleeding build with Bloody Pox and then run all of this lightning and bleeding here. You could even go into Grasping Vines if you wanted. The full pet build, the half pet build. You can use a two-handed gun, a two-handed melee weapon. You don't even have to use two-handed if you don't want to. You just ignore the one shaman skill. It's very flexible. No matter how you want to build, this combination offers you something. No matter how wacky it is, it can work, and it can work really well, items or no. Its damage output, I would put at roughly 2. I'm going to put this at a 2.0. I almost put it at 2.5, but then I remembered that there is a certain amount of clash between the damage types here. Occultist does not boost lightning damage in any way, and Shaman does not organically boost vitality damage. It deals vitality damage, don't get me wrong. It can reduce resistances to vitality and bleeding. Great. But does it specifically enhance vitality damage? And the answer is no. So there is a little bit of incongruity there between the two classes. So it is only a 2.0 on the damage. They do clash slightly in that aspect. Defensively, it is going to be also a 2. While you do have a certain amount of damage absorption available to you, you don't really have anything that prevents entrapment, which is quite dangerous. As I've mentioned several times, entrapment is probably the one guaranteed death that you'll find. And you don't have a whole lot of pure armor increases. In fact, you have the oak skin, which is nice. We've got those resistances there. And you've got the damage absorption you could get from Primal Bond or Possession. And then the rest of it's just straight healing, either through damaging people with Sigil of Consumption or Wendigo Totem, or possibly the rather weak at this Devouring Swarm, which doesn't do enough damage to make that really count that much. At least most of the time, unless you're hyper-specializing in that for some reason. So, you do have a small problem with defense. So defense here is only a 2.0, because really you're looking at a lot of self-heal, or doing the damage and healing off of the damage. Or something else is healing you. Wendigo Totem, the Crow, both can heal you. And that's really its main issue, is that there's not... It has one or two different ways of increasing your survivability. Sure, absolutely. Brute Force increases your health. It gives you that more attack damage converted to health. Yes, but you have to be using a two-handed weapon. And if you're using a two-handed weapon, because you can't equip a shield or an offhand that might offer you some resistances, potentially, you need that increased durability, that increased endurance. So it is a little weaker defensively. So you have 2.0 offense, 2.0 defense, coordination. This is a 1.5. Again, this partially is because the Shaman doesn't enhance vitality damage, the Occultist doesn't enhance lightning damage except through the Crow, but even then it's broad elemental, and we've already talked about that. There is some mild clashing that's done here. So, in terms of coordination, this is a 1.5. It's right smack in the middle. Some things work, some things won't. If you build this one skill, this means these other skills won't work. If you build, for example, Primal Strike, you're probably not looking to build into Soleil's Witchfire, because that's not really going to do much for you. As an example. So that, because they don't coordinate. This increases vitality and chaos damage. And this does lightning, bleeding, and electrocution. I'm sorry, physical. I've already said lightning. So, yeah, there's not any kind of crossover between those two skills. As an example, same thing with Sickle of Consumption. That's fire, chaos, and vitality. Primal Strike, savagery, brute force. None of them care. So you do have that kind of clash going on here. So it is a 1.5. So to recap this class combination, 2.0 on offense, 2.0 on defense, 1.5 on coordination, and 3.0 on versatility. Now, these are the top 4 representations of each of the categories I've mentioned, which is why they're S tier. There are other class combinations that work almost as well in each of these particular categories, but not quite. For example, the Soldier Necromancer combination would be the A tier version of the Soldier Arcanist combination, and right below that, Soldier Oathkeeper. Now again, I'm talking about durability there. Soldier Oathkeeper has better coordination than Soldier Necromancer. I forgot Necromancer for a second there. So I'm really breaking down these 4 kind of broad types of builds: offense, defense, versatile, and coordinated. So that way, how you want to play can be broadly indicated by these. Are you an aggressive person who likes to get in there in the thick of things? Nightblade Occultist. Are you looking for a challenge? Are you an experienced player who's looking to improv something for fun, and you want some challenge, and Nightblade Occultist is too easy? Sure, I know how you feel. Nightblade Necromancer. The A tier version of Nightblade Occultist. You see where I'm going with this, but that's generally what the series is looking to do. Take each of these 4 concepts: offense, defense, versatility, coordination, and break down various versions of these broad concepts. But this is the S tier. These are the most effective combinations in each of their respective categories. How you want to handle these, entirely up to you. I'll be doing 4 more of these videos. This is going to be a 5-part series. This is part 1, obviously. So again, if you need to reference these, the ratings will be in the description below. Thank you all very much for watching and or listening. Thank you again, Diablo Fallout, for the suggestion and for your continued support. I do appreciate it. If you liked this, please like and subscribe, and have a great 24 hours. Oh, and if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or ideas, please leave them in the comments below. I do read them. Thank you.